You know those amazing, super complex shapes you see in modern jewelry or even in architecture? Ever wonder how they're made? Well, it's not always by hand. A lot of the time, it all starts with something really simple, a slider. And today, we're going to break down how this one tiny tool is totally revolutionizing how we sculpt with code. So let's dive in.
So think about how digital design used to work. It was kind of like sculpting with digital clay, right? You'd build an object, let's say a ring, one piece at a time. And if a client came back and said, hey, can you make this a little wider? You'd often have to manually rework the whole thing, sometimes even start from scratch. It was totally static, a real one-and-done kind of deal.
But parametric design, it completely flips that idea on its head. See, instead of building the final object, you're building the recipe for it. You're creating this whole dynamic system where every single part knows about every other part. You see this wild-looking diagram? That's not just a bunch of code. That is the literal recipe for the ring you see. And the best part? You change just one ingredient in that recipe and poof, the whole design just updates, all by itself.
Okay, so this is the absolute key takeaway. We're shifting from making these static one-off models to designing dynamic recipes. It's a whole new way of thinking. You're not just a digital sculptor anymore. You're more like a digital chef.
Now, the engine behind that recipe is something called an algorithm. And I know that word can sound a little intimidating, but don't let it fool you. All it is a set of instructions. It's literally the recipe for building that ring. You know how a jeweler has a very specific set of steps to create a ring? Well, an algorithm is just that same process, but written down so a computer can follow it perfectly every single time.
Okay, so if we're working with a recipe, we need a way to control the ingredients, right? To add a little more salt, a little less sugar, and that brings us to what is maybe the single most important component in this entire process.
And here it is, the number slider. I know, it looks so simple, right? But this little thing is our main control panel. It's the knob we turn, the lever we pull. Honestly, it is without a doubt the most important, most widely used way to input information in parametric design. It's how we talk directly to that recipe we just built.
And using it couldn't be easier. You literally just grab that little grip with your mouse and drag it. But don't let that simplicity fool you. There is a ton of power under the hood. If you double-click it, this whole editor pops up. And in there, you can change everything. You can give it a name, you can decide if you want whole numbers or decimals, and this is super important, you set its limits.
So those limits have a name. It's called the numeric domain. And this is a really key idea. By setting a minimum and a maximum number, the designer is basically creating a creative playground. They're saying, look, the width of this ring can be anything from, say, 2 to 6 millimeters, but absolutely no more and no less. It puts guardrails on the design, setting the boundaries for all the creative exploration.
All right, now this is where things get really cool, because it's not just about setting a number and hitting enter. It's about the instant live connection between that slider and the 3D model. We call this the live feedback loop.
And when I say live, I mean live. Every single tiny little nudge you give that slider's grip, it makes the software go back, reread the entire recipe from top to bottom, recalculate everything, and then boom, it updates the 3D model instantly. There's no render button. There's no waiting around. The feedback is right there, right now.
And this is a perfect example of what I'm talking about. On the right, inside the editor, this one's called Grasshopper, you've got a simple slider called Radius. You can see it's wired up to a little component that just makes a circle. Then, on the left, in the main window, you see the actual circle. As you move that slider back and forth, you see the circle grow and shrink right there in real time. It's like you're physically sculpting with numbers. It's so direct, so tactile.
Okay, so we get the mechanics, right? But how do designers actually use this live feedback in the real world? I mean, what's it good for? Well, it turns out this simple little loop gives designers 3 really powerful ways to sculpt.
We're going to look at 3 main techniques here. The first is direct control. The second is for design iteration. And the third is a really interesting one called shaking the input.
So the first one, direct control, is probably the most obvious way to use a slider. You just tie it directly to some specific dimension. So if you need to change a ring size, guess what? You move the ring size slider. If you want to change how many stones are in it, yep, there's a slider for that too. It's all about precise, predictable control.
Okay, but things get really creative with this next one, design iteration. Here, a slider isn't just about plugging in a final number. No, it becomes a tool for exploration. A designer can just scrub that slider back and forth and see hundreds of different versions in seconds. They're visually searching for that sweet spot, that perfect range where the design just feels right, where it's all balanced. It totally changes the game from just building something to actively discovering the best version of it.
And that brings us to the last technique, and this one is by far the most unusual. And honestly, it's pretty clever. So what happens when the computer just gets stuck? Sometimes with really complex problems, like imagine trying to get a super intricate pattern to wrap perfectly around a weird curvy shape. The algorithm just hits a wall. It can't find a solution. The answer? You gotta shake the inputs.
Now, this isn't just randomly yanking the slider around. A shake is a tiny, tiny adjustment. I'm talking like 1/1000th of a millimeter. It is a change so small that it has absolutely no effect on the final physical object. But that tiny little nudge can be just enough to help the computer's math find a solution it was stuck on. It's kind of like, gently tapping an old TV to get the picture to come back.
So, when you step back and you look at all these things together, you start to realize something pretty profound is happening here. When you're not just plugging in numbers, but you're also exploring options, and you're even kind of debugging the algorithm with a shake, you're not really making a single object anymore. You're building an entire design system.
And that's really the heart of it, right? The slider is so much more than just a little button on a screen. It's the bridge. It's the thing that connects a designer's human intuition with the raw number-crunching power of the algorithm. It's what translates that gut feeling, that thought of, this should be a little curvier, into a precise number that the computer can understand and act on in a split second.
And that really leaves us with a pretty fascinating question to chew on. In a world where a single slider can create a nearly infinite number of variations, what does the role of the designer become? They're less of a builder and more of a curator, picking the best option from a sea of possibilities. Which makes you wonder, in a system like this, what does it even mean for a design to be finished?